B&Q, we've grown our range to over 2,000 plants, and we take pride in the quality of each and every one, because we know what it means to be plant proud. From our safe hands to your green fingers, we've got everything you need for brighter days. So bring on the fresh soil and muddy knees. With over 2,000 plants at B&Q, we will grow again.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this second session of Gardening Made Easy, sponsored by B&Q. My name's Clare Coulson, and I'm a gardening writer here at The Telegraph. Over the next 45 minutes, we're going to be talking about how you can create a beautiful and wildlife-friendly garden from scratch. And joining me today is the amazing floral designer and flower farmer, Milli Proust, who I'm sure many of you know from her amazing Instagram account. Here she is. Hi, Milli.
Hi.
Lovely to see you.
So lovely to see you, Claire.
So first of all, I thought we'd just talk a little bit about our own gardens, because we've both made a garden from scratch. We both have completely different conditions and types of gardens. We've got a few slides to show you. So Milli, if you just want to kind of give us a bit of an overview of your garden that you've made over the last 4 years.
There it is. So I moved here 4 years ago, just over 4 years ago. And on the left, that's the first year in April, mid-May. And then that second picture on the right is last year. And that bed was full of self-seeders, so I was really lucky with that. But also dahlias. And once I removed the dahlias, there was nothing. So it had really good bones, a great pathway and great shape. And I just set about filling it up.
Simple as that.
Simple as that.
And also just tell us, while we're on this slide, because you're in an amazing setting, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. It's a really good little setting. So it's surrounded on all sides by woodland, so it feels very, very private, and it means that we've got a lot of bird life already, but we encourage them to come into the garden by planting a lot of things that they'll enjoy and habitat that they can enjoy, so not just the woodland. And we're on heavy clay, which I know is very different from your garden, Claire.
Totally, the total opposite. So I'm sure we will come onto that. And we've had so many questions about attracting pollinators, attracting birds. So we'll talk about that more as well. And then on the next slide, we've got the other side of your garden, which is your cutting garden.
Yeah. So as soon as I started gardening, so I gardened before in London, but I only had access to balconies or pots that I carried around from rented accommodation to rented accommodation. So as soon as I got a garden to use and work with, I fully became obsessed and started moving every single bit of lawn over to growing cut flowers for my business, which is designing with flowers. So on the left, that's actually I think November 2019, so not that long ago, just a year and a half ago. And on the right that's September last year, so that's a year's difference. And that is to do with no dig. So I went to visit Charles Dowding, who is an absolute legend. I'm sure that you all know about him already, and if you don't, go and check him out, because he does no dig, and you can create a garden from scratch really easily and really quickly using that method. Plus it helps sustain the soil beneath, and you can keep the infrastructure of the soil, and all the worms are happy, and all the mycorrhizal and all that sort of stuff is happy. So it's really good for the environment beneath the soil, but also means that you can create a garden really, really quickly.
And I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about soil maybe in a minute. And on the next slide, this is my garden. So on the left is sort of 2015, 2016. And then this is a couple of years later on the right-hand side. And I'm on the Suffolk coast, really south-facing, sun-baked, sandy soil, completely the opposite to you, Millie. And the other thing I wanted to stress at this point is this garden, and probably Millie's too, is done on a real budget. You know, I grow as much as I can from seed, which you'll see when we go to the next slide in a sec. Splitting plants, you know, I've done it all kind of quite slowly in a way to save money as much as possible. So this is the first kind of double border that I did. And then on the next slide, this is another garden area. So this is like an old stable block and a kind of, what was a dumping ground behind. And then I made this gravel garden, and this truly was all from seed. So, you know, plants for probably £10 to actually grow all of the plants. And the other thing I want to say at this point is that I've also really learned not to fight the conditions. So all of that stuff that I've said about sandy soil and really dry, you know, I tried for years to grow phloxes, hydrangeas, you know, all the things that love moisture, and it's just money down the drain ultimately, or spending ages trying to kind of nurture things. So I think that's, if you are really starting out with a garden, I think that's one of the key lessons, isn't it, Millie? It's like, really understand your conditions and kind of work to that rather than trying to work against it.
Absolutely.
So if we go on to another slide, we have got sort of how you start your beds, I guess.
Exactly.
Do you want to talk, I mean, you talked about Charles Dowding. Do you want to sort of just tell us how you actually just start making a bed?
Yeah, so there's two ways that you can do it. If you've got a lot of creeping buttercup or perennial weeds in your grass, I would say put cardboard down, and you can, so it's a great way to recycle, and it would just go back into the soil. So if you've been getting packages during lockdown, that's a great way to use them. So cardboard, and then a layer of organic compost acting as a mulch. And the first year, it's quite a lot of compost, but it will, so it's a bit of an investment. Really, that's the biggest investment, is me opening up new bits of land, and then it's just seeds and annuals. But it can feel like quite an overwhelming investment to begin with, because I have about 5 or 6 inches of compost that I buy in bulk, and I make a lot myself as well. But if you are just starting and you don't have a compost heap yet, you're going to have to buy in. And then the subsequent years, I just top it up each year with 1 inch, 1 to 2 inches, but generally 1 inch is fine. But the amount of time that I save in weeding and watering and feeding, I don't have to do any of that for the rest of the year. And I am on clay, which holds and retains the nutrients and moisture for longer. So I'm really lucky with that. But it really does work. I think I weeded once last year. So it is a time saver. So when I weigh it up with that method works best for me. So I lay, first year, cardboard, 6 inches of compost, and for the pathways, I often do cardboard and then just a really thin layer of wood chip that I can make myself from the wood that we have in our area. And but you can just use a bit of topsoil too. And then just the following years, I just do a tiny little top-up redress, and that is it. It's really simple.
And then what about, so when you're doing that mulching in the, which I'm such a evangelist for mulching, but what are you, so you're using your own compost largely for that, Millie?
Yeah, largely for that, but that's taken me the best part of 4 years to like figure out how to make compost. It really was one of those things that I knew I had to figure out, but it felt like some crazy alchemy that I wouldn't understand. And I really was quite intimidated by making compost until I realized that there wasn't a perfect recipe or a perfect way of doing it. And there was also a tiny bit of poetic license involved in the making of it. So what I do is I just try and do 50-50 split ratio between brown matter and green matter. But if it has too much green matter, it goes all sludgy and stinky. And if you have too much brown, it just won't cook very quickly. So you'll know quite quickly if you've got your ratios wrong, and then you can just add a bit more of the other ingredient. And because I grow on, it's almost an acre that I grow on for cut flowers now. So I have a lot of food for my compost heap. Everything goes in there. That's what where the waste goes. It goes on my compost heap. So I'm just about at a place now where I have enough compost to mulch my entire growing area from homemade. But if I'm making a new area, which I'm trying to grab corners here, there, and everywhere every year, I have to buy in. But I try and find the best organic at the best price that I can, and it's worth finding good quality compost for the long run.
Yeah, and actually, I'm just going to mention, because I saw on Instagram the other day that somebody had posted an organic bag of compost that actually had peat, so organic and peat free.
Yeah, and also there's a thing called aminopyralids, which is a weed killer used on grasses for animals, and it kills like legume seeds and a few other types of seeds that farmers don't want in their crop. But the problem with this chemical is that it doesn't break down in the digestive systems of animals, so it ends up, even if it says organic, you can end up having aminopyralids in your compost, which only break down after spending 6 months in soil with microorganisms breaking it down. So it's worth doing a tiny little seed test. If you buy in compost, just get a little pot and then grow tomatoes or beans, and if they start curling at the edges and looking really sick, then don't plant into that for 6 months. It's a good tip.
That's an amazing tip. So we've had loads of questions. You're also a beekeeper, which I didn't mention earlier. Loads of questions about what to plant for birds, for bees. Maybe we should take pollinators first, actually, and talk about what to plant for bees.
Anything that's open for them, that's easy access for them, is the main thing. So anything that's like, I'm actually obsessed with ruffly things, so this is terrible for the bees, but they're for me. Also, when you're growing for cut flowers, you don't want the bee to pollinate it, because as soon as they pollinate it, it shortens the vase life. So there's a constant battle of like beekeeper and wanting nature to be able to feast on my garden, and me wanting my flowers for cutting and for the purpose of selling. So I make sure that I provide both. So in my permanent borders and in my wilder bits, I fill it with pollinator friendly things. So flowering shrubs are great, and you can use them for cutting, and it doesn't matter if they lose their flowers, you should still have their foliage. And they often provide berries in the autumn. So things like Viburnum opulus, crabapples are the best. They give that spring hit for the bees, and then they have the apples for the birds. Spindleberry, I love that one. But yeah, any flowers that have a lovely, open, easy, accessible flower.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing to emphasize that, you know, the free things that we love, you know, the roses that are all just, you know, hundreds of petals, are not the most helpful. So it's really being as kind of wild, I guess, in plant choices, isn't it? And close to wildlife. And the other thing I was going to say when you were talking there about shrubs is just having that layering. So, you know, trees are amazing, aren't they? Because it's not one flower, it's tens of thousands of flowers and then fruit. Another question that we had was, somebody had asked about removing all of the ivy from hedges. I know you've got a bit of ivy because you've talked about your hedge, but I've got loads of it. I mean, loads. So I remove it from because I live in an old stone cottage, I remove it from the building, but everywhere else, you know, on the peripheries. And in the autumn, it's incredible. It's absolutely lovely.
And I think it's very decorative. They're like atoms, the ivy berries, and the flowers are quite sweet. And the bees, when I see my hives on the ivy flowers, as a beekeeper, you know it's the end of season, because once they go for the ivy flowers out, it turns the honey very bitter and not very palatable. And so you just know, it's like a natural way of saying no more honey is to be taken. This is for winter stores. This is for the bees. And the ivy it's always just humming. You can just watch. It looks alive with pollinators when it's in flower. It's amazing.
Yeah. And what about birds? Are there other, I mean, you've mentioned crabapples, amazing, hawthorns. Are there other things that you have? I mean, I guess hedges, you've got that amazing hedge along the front. Somebody had asked actually about what they can cover a fence with. And I guess just getting an amazing hedge that's providing habitat.
Absolutely. Hedge, my hedges have ivy growing through, which I don't mind at all. I know that some people would worry that it's going to damage the trees or the shrubs, but for me, having like a area that's got climbers and shrubs that can cover and also create habitat. So the leaf litter underneath that's created by any kind of shrubs that are deciduous, which is great, but also any kind of evergreens that can provide shelter for birds during the winter, and anything that flowers in spring. There's this one called Prunus padus, and that's the bird cherry, and it's amazing for using for cut flowers for the house. It's got this incredible foliage. There's one that's purple. It's so stunning. It's like this sort of very smoky, moody color, and then these beautiful pink flowers, and then cherries, these cherries that are not edible for humans, but the birds love them. That's a great one.
And also, I guess, having winter flowering shrubs, winter honeysuckle. Because, I mean, in fact, it's really weird in this very cold winter that we've had that I saw bees so early this year. But, when there are those kind of winter flowering shrubs, they've all got something to go to. Crocus, I guess, another one.
Crocus are amazing. And sarcococca and crocus, I underplant. So for me, underplanting is the easiest way to not only bring joy, but to feed the bees really early on. And bulbs can be relatively inexpensive if you go for like a bulk buy, or you team up with a neighbor or a friend, so that you can share the costs and therefore get a bigger quantity. So yeah, crocus, and then followed by really early iris reticulata, and small early daffodils like Arctic bells, bulbocodium, and then the wild tulips, so like sylvestris and turkestana, like all those things that you can underplant under shrubs that are not going to cause any kind of, they won't need much, they can create it from just their bulbs. That's a brilliant way to bring extra color and extra wildlife in, I think.
And also it means you've got an amazing garden from, like almost year round. You've got beautiful things to look at.
Yeah.
One of the questions was, if you could do one thing for wildlife, if you could add one thing to your garden, what would it be?
I would say have some water somewhere. It's really good. It's really important for wildlife to be able to drink, and I think there's often in more suburban or urban settings, there's not huge, like really close access to water necessarily, and the bees have to find fresh water too. So any kind of little, whether it's like a bird bath or just like a vessel and an old sink that you can make into a little pond, that I think would be the one for me.
Have you just built a pond, or have I done that? Tell us about your pond.
I just built a pond last year. It was like the first lockdown project, and it's great. Within 3 days, we had newts. It was so exciting. Yeah, love
That's
it.
amazing. And everything, I guess, it's that cycle, isn't it? Of you bring in one thing and then another thing comes. So let's do some of the questions from this morning as well. What are your favorite things to plant in shade, Millie?
Okay, I love shade because I live in shade. I lose light at about 3 o'clock, and then I don't get some like direct sunlight. So I feel like my whole garden is a shade garden. There are some roses that thrive in shade. Sceptred Isle is one that my grandmother bought me, and it is in complete shade. It's shaded, it's on the corner of a house, and it does really well. And then hellebores, I love that early early colour, and I think they're so magical to have. They're very slow growing though, so you have to be a bit patient. Then foxgloves are fantastic for pollinators, and I think they give any garden a kind of magic ethereal quality, so I love them. And there's lots of shrubs that you can plant in shade too, and crabapples can handle half shade, and there's lots that you can do. You don't just have to have hostas and ferns. You can really find some really beautiful, stunning flowers. And roses, it's worth going and checking out shade tolerant roses, because I think the garden's not complete without them.
And this question is quite specific. I'm not going to ask any badger questions, but because we don't know about badgers. Nobody asked about badgers. But somebody's asked, Deborah has asked, is it essential to clear out bird nesting boxes every year? Do you have nesting boxes? I think you've got so many trees that...
I do. I actually do have bird nesting boxes, and I saw it today, and a coal tit was going in. I actually don't, but I have a feeling that my partner does. So I don't listen to me, Deborah, if yay or nay. I reckon you probably should, but I don't feel like I have an authority on that to answer that properly. I think it's a great thing to have, and it probably sounds like a wise thing to do. I don't know.
Yeah,
sorry,
from a disease perspective, I'm sure you're supposed to. The other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about was sort of how you plan areas. And in the slides, I was going to put one of my really aged 5 mood boards I create.
Honestly, that's the way I do it though. It's like really lo-fi. Oh, I love doing it though. And catalogs, if you get sent a catalog, if you've ever bought seeds, you generally do end up getting the catalog without even asking for it. And not only is it lovely to look through and make your wish list, cut them out, the ones that you like, and then you can lay it on your kitchen table and have a play with what looks nice next to each other. I'm such a visual person that it is just mood boards for me, and whether I do it online or just on Pinterest or just on like word processing document, or from the catalogs out there, every year that's all I do is I put things next to each other and work out whether the colors work first, and then I'll look at the heights and think about whether it needs to be more forward or back. And I do that with my cutting garden too, which is, it's supposed to be, an efficient working space, but I really like it looking really beautiful too. So I really put a lot of thought into the combinations and the colors, and it is just mood boarding. It is.
And what about, I'm just sort of thinking about if anybody's been to any of Fergus Garrett's great Dixon lectures, which are just amazing, and he has this sort of flip chart with the succession. Have you been to any of them, Millie?
No, never.
Oh my God. So it'll be all of the plant names and then everything, and when it's flowering with all these crazy lines going everywhere. Because I think that idea of succession and having something happening all the time is maybe when you're starting out, that's quite a hard thing to get your head around, isn't
Definitely.
it?
Really hard, and especially with annuals. So the main bit of my garden is annuals. One, because it takes a long time to sort of build a garden with shrubs. It takes a lot more investment financially and in time-wise. So succession with annuals is hard because the most efficient way of doing it is planting everything at once and then planting everything out at once. But to have succession, you have to really look mathematically at how many days it usually takes on average for that variety to flower, and then count backwards and put dates in and then do that. And it's a really hard thing to get your head around, and I still find it challenging. And the ways that I try and figure it out is I just compartmentalize strips, and then use things like cosmos, which are really prolific, which have a longer sort of life than a stock, which you can only cut once or won't last long in the garden. And cosmos, the more you deadhead, the more that you get them. Dahlias too, that you're going to get a good solid 4 months out of them, and that makes succession a lot easier. And then bulbs, I use bulbs a lot, and I find that a really easy way to have succession because they flower and they come back year after year, from crocus to narcissus to tulips, and then after tulips you have lilies and alliums, so you can create succession with that. I think we've lost Claire.
And sorry.
That's great.
And that the front garden that we saw at the beginning, can you hear me, Millie?
I can hear you. I just can't see you.
The front, oh God, sorry. I don't know whether it's your connection or mine. I'm just going to carry on like it's not happening.
Yeah.
The front section that we saw at the beginning, is that really a succession when you talk about having the bulbs? And so when does that take you up to then, if you do, is that really like August, September, if you're including lilies and gladioli and stuff?
So I don't put bulbs. Actually, I put gladioli in there. I don't have lilies in there. I have them in pots around the border. But that border really is taken over by herbaceous perennials. So it starts with like primroses and snowdrops. Also, I know that you know this, but other people might not. I used to have to commute back to town for work, 9 to 5 office job, and then I'd only really get to enjoy the garden after dark. So I planted it to be best at nighttime, which just means I've planted very pale colours and light colours that in the moonlight really pop. So it's snowdrops and primroses, and then it's followed by tete-a-tete, quite early narcissus, and then the tulips and the thalia narcissus come up, and then the lupins come. And the lupin, and the best thing in my garden is this lupin, and it's one thing that I did inherit from the very brilliant, botanically minded family that had the garden before, and it's called Persian slipper, and it is so beautiful, and I've built the entire garden around it to make it the centerpiece. And it's this very pale blue, and it starts very ombre, and then it just opens up, and then the self-seeders start, so the foxgloves, and I let them do their thing. And in winter, when it's a bit barer, I go around and find their seedlings and put them where I want them in the picture. And linaria, and I've got euphorbia self-seeder in there too. I find them really useful. And then the roses come. That's the succession after. And then that's followed by fennel, bronze fennel, and I've got salvias and asters, and that takes me pretty much to November. And then there's the one thing I did invest in there was yew balls. I've got a couple of just very small balls that give a bit of structure during the winter. And I've got phlomis in there too. So I leave the seed heads, and I leave the seed heads on the fennel too for the birds. But also it looks beautiful when you get that nice icy morning and everything's gilded. So yeah, I think it looks beautiful all year round.
And with all those self-seeders, are you then spending quite a lot of time weeding out if they go too crazy, or you don't have that problem?
I don't, because I am an absolute serial planter of things too close. So I really like the generous look, and I don't like the soil being bare. One, because the soil doesn't actually particularly like being bare. If it's mulched, it's not bare. It's got mulch on it, but the soil will just send up weed seeds, like, to basically cover it and help with its structure if it's bare. So I actually never have a problem with self-seeders going too overboard, because there's just not enough space for them. And so I really cherish my self-seeders, and I still sow more foxgloves every year, just in case, because I really love them, and they need light to germinate. So if my border is too full, they might not germinate. So I do not have a problem with too many self-seeders.
That's interesting. Listen, Rob's asked an interesting question. How do you differentiate between a self-seeder and a weed when they just start growing? Oh my God, I think this is one of the hardest things. You know, I just have to say, when I started gardening, my lovely friend Darren, who I just learned so much from, and I pestered him non-stop questions. And I used to go out, and I mean, obviously there were like millions of weeds because I hadn't done anything. And
it's so difficult.
I sent him these random pictures. What's this? Just like a picture of like a tiny weed seedling.
Yeah.
And I just think, I mean, Millie, you tell us as well, but I just think you learn to know what your plants look like as a seedling, don't you?
Yeah, and a really good way of learning that is like, find out what the plant is when it's grown, or the plant that you want is. Find a packet of seeds. Usually, they're like £2.50 to £4 maximum for a packet of seeds, and you'll get a lot of seeds in there. And sow them somewhere in a tray, and you'll get to know what they look like quite quickly from that, just by tending to them each day for a season, then you'll know them. That's the only way I've learned, because honestly, the first year I was like tending weeds in the borders, being like, you might be nice, I don't know. But also I am a really big advocate for weeds, because there are many weeds or things that are actually considered weeds, which I think are very beautiful, like cow parsley. I welcome that into my garden. I'm like, come on in, you lovely weed.
At your peril.
Yeah.
Really random, I don't know whether the same to you or me, because I've just planted some bearded iris beds, but somebody's asked, how are your bearded iris coming along?
No, someone is following along with what I'm doing, because I have planted bearded iris. I planted bearded iris last year. I made like quite a big investment on it, because there was a bit of a gap with my nationwide bouquet deliveries. I didn't have like a focal flower for May yet. I've got peonies, but they have to wait a little bit, as will the iris. But I thought, invest in my future. And I put them in, and I didn't mulch. I just put them in. And obviously all the weeds came up, and the rhizomes are very close to the surface, so you can't really hoe. So you have to hand weed. Anyway, so I lifted all of them and then mulched and put them back in, and they're doing great. So thanks for asking.
And what can you tell us some of your favorite iris? What have you got in there?
So, oh my goodness, I don't know the names yet, because I feel like I learn the names when I've met them in person. And that sounds so silly, personifying my plants all the time, chatting to my garden. When they flower, I feel like I'll remember their names better. But I've gone for lots of terracotta colours, lots of warm colours, and a couple of blue, interesting colours. But I really enjoy the bearded iris, where you get really unusual color combinations, because it unlocks an amazing amount of color work that you can do in designs or in the vase. So if you have two different colors in one flower, you then can get flowers from that color family and this color family and put them together, and it still be harmonious, where it might not be usually.
I guess that's the other thing also with like what you're growing. You are really thinking about what you're going to cut, what you're going to work with. I want to ask, is there one supply that you got your iris rhizomes from?
Yeah, I'm going to look it up now. It's actually a Kelway's.
Ah, okay. I was going to mention too, because I planted bearded iris beds as well. So Thornbird, have you seen Thornbird?
No, let me write this down.
Let me just write that down. It's amazing, kind of khaki, like a bit lime, incredible. And then another one that I've planted that I cannot wait for it to flower is called Grande Coquette, and that's like a sort of lime but with blue. I mean, just incredible. I cannot wait to the iris. I'm so excited. Anyway, enough about me. So lots of questions also about pests, although actually no, plants. Susan's put plants for deer, so that's not considering that the deer are pests. But are there things that you plant to kind of feed rabbits, deer that come into the garden?
But we have a lot of deer where we are because of the woods, and it's the almost 300 acres of woodland that we're sort of on the edge of. So it's a complete haven for deer. They've got a lot, but they love acorns. They gorge on acorns. They love roses, and they love my sweet peas. But I don't plant them for them. And then rabbits. I haven't seen that many rabbits around. I don't actually plant anything specifically for them. Although we have just planted like a load of apple trees, which they all love. If you want to feed an apple tree to your deer and your rabbits, they love that. But as long as there's enough habitat, they like having. If you've got a garden where deer might come in and you want to welcome the deer, as long as there's like open patches and like long grass, and also shelter that's nearby, they'll enjoy that. I think they don't want to be too scared, but they do actually like grazing in long open.
And then how do you then protect? So if you've got, I mean, I noticed last week that something's helpfully come along, just eaten the tops off my tulips that haven't flowered yet. How do you then protect, how do you welcome nature in, but then not on my peonies,
Yeah, you have to be really unmean about it, because it will happen. If you want nature in, it will happen. I had a wedding booked, 2 weddings of the season, the final weddings, in October 2019, and 2 weeks before the second to last one, a deer came in overnight and ate everything. And I took it really badly, but you just have to, I welcome nature in, so you just have to sort of take a deep breath and be like, it's not, I'm a custodian of this land, it's their land too, we're all part of nature. You have to kind of just breathe through it and not get too precious about it. But there are measures that you can take. So I have put a fence around the bits where I really don't want them to get in. So I still will plant in bits that they can get in, but not the things that I'll get precious or upset about, like roses. So a deer fence has to be quite tall. It's just a 5-foot fence that's chicken wire underneath, so that, like, I've dug it down, which is a bit of a bore, but it's worth doing for rabbits if you don't want rabbits in. And then along the top, I've just got 2 wires that run the top so that the deer can't jump over, and that does work. And then as soon as that they know that they can't, they'll make a new route through. So I still have them in bits of my garden, but they don't come through the heart anymore. They just they find a new sort of daily trail to go through.
Thanks, Millie. Helen Jackson has got a question on dahlias. What are the best dahlias for clay soil?
Good question. I am a real experimenter with dahlias, and I find that most do really well. And I'm on really heavy clay. I mean, like thick seams of clay. Like you go in and it's like sticky. I'd say, if you've got that situation, find another spot in your garden or do a raised bed, and they'll do absolutely fine on clay. The thing with dahlias is that they actually need a fair bit of water when they're flowering to keep flowering, but they don't like being soggy over winter. So when you're on clay, the problem with dahlias is that you can't really keep them in without having losses. You might not lose all of them. I do overwinter them in the ground quite often, but I do lose them sometimes. So it's a bit of a gamble. But then on the flip side, if you've got clay, you have to dig them up, and that is back-achingly difficult. And the clay sticks to the tubers, and you have to store these big, sticky, heavy clay tubers. Carrying a clay tuber is a lot. So I'd say if you've got really thick clay, do it in a raised bed for sure, and just don't have to deal with that problem. But most do absolutely thrive on my clay soil.
I've just spotted, I'm not very good at monitoring these questions, so apologies to everybody, but I've just spotted a few questions from our pictures that we had up earlier. Kathy has asked, how long did that take to grow? And I don't know which question, but I think for all of those slides that we showed you at the start, really it was just like a couple of seasons for Millie's garden and for both bits of mine. I'm really impatient, Millie. I don't know about you, but I want quick results always. So
the annuals is the cheapest and quickest way. I'm a real advocate for annuals. You can, if you get a packet of Cosmos Purity, you always get a lot of purity seeds in the Cosmos packets because they're a less expensive Cosmos variety. But you can fill a garden with Cosmos and dahlias and bulbs, and it be very successional. You have the bulbs and then the Cosmos and then the dahlias for relatively inexpensive, and that's immediate. It's so thrilling when you have that, when you can have that power to create a garden so quickly for not a huge amount of money. And with dahlias, you just have to buy one tuber and it will create a huge plant, and then you can lift it and divide it and you can have suddenly 8 plants. So within 2 years you can have a really big dahlia patch. And then with annuals, I save the seeds. Some things cross really easily. Cosmos cross really easily. Snapdragons cross really easily. But most things will come back true. And when it's done well in your garden and you're saving fresh seed, not only are you saving money on your next year's seed, but you're getting really healthy seed that already thrived in your garden. You're going to get really good results with that. But yeah, you can make a garden really, really quickly.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing, just to kind of add to seeds, is just doing cuttings. I've got to do when I I'm doing an extension, hopefully. And so I've got to do a new garden probably next year. So I'm going to do all of the cuttings of everything that I love this spring, so that I don't have to buy plants next year when I then start doing that garden. And cut it. I never get over the absolutely awe-inspiring nature of cuttings, that you chop something off, put it in a pot and create new plants. It just seems so, as do seeds. It just always, it's amazing, isn't it?
I was so scared of taking cuttings because it feels like, because I'm not horticulturally trained at all, and it is all just learning as I go. And I'm only in this is my 5th season, so I am a real beginner. So cuttings felt way too high a level. But when I started doing it a couple of years ago, I couldn't believe how easy it was. It's definitely worth a try, especially with just anything soft, tends to take quite easily. I just have a go because it does work.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, absolutely amazing. I'm just going to answer some of these. What are the tall purple flowers mixed with grasses at the back of the stables? I think you're talking about the Verbena bonariensis and Felicity. If I were to grow Verbena bonariensis from seed, would they flower this year?
I've done it before and it takes so long. Cuttings are the best way for Verbena bonariensis, but I remember doing it the very first year that I got the garden 4 years ago, and I think it took a long time to germinate. I think it took about a month to germinate, and then it took a long time to bulk up, and I think it flowered in its 2nd year. But it self-seeds as well. The only thing with Verbena bonariensis is that it's not really, really hardy. So if you have a really hard frost that's like below -5 or feels like below -5, I lost all of my Verbena this year because of it.
I wonder whether that's wet though, because it seeds like crazy. So Felicity, I think I had 1 Verbena plant in my gravel garden, and I probably now have about 300. It quickly becomes a forest of Verbena, but it never dies here. But maybe that is to do with drainage, and even when it gets very cold,
I lose them. So I'm gonna probably sow some this year, and then next year take cuttings from it, and just get in the habit of taking cuttings so that I don't lose it again, because it is such a nice thing to have.
Yeah. And Pam has asked, we sort of touched on this earlier, Millie, but advice for poor clay soil in deep shade.
Okay. A stilby is a herbaceous perennial, and it's got this lovely, you can get all sorts of colors and all sorts of different sizes, and it's got this gorgeous leaf that comes up about now that is quite a moody looking leaf, and then it had this spire that can last for ages. But honestly, you can put a stilby anywhere underneath a tree in deep shade and it will do its thing. So that can create a great pop of color in any kind of really poor shady spot.
Amazing. I just kill it every time I try and I just don't have the right conditions. No shade. Advice for planting in, I don't know whether this applies to you, Millie, it definitely applies to me. Advice for planting in windy and strong sun conditions in the Outer Hebrides.
Wow.
I love that.
Okay. Well, in the Outer Hebrides, you have the flag iris everywhere. So I reckon if they are prolific in nature, they'll be great in your garden. And you can create windbreaks really easily. You can grow miscanthus, pampas grass from seed really, really quickly. And not everyone loves grasses, but you can find some very beautiful varieties of miscanthus if you're not so into the 1970s pampas look. And those grow rapidly. Within a year, you'll have a windbreak, and you can create a garden on the other side of that windbreak. As long as you just know which way your prevailing winds are coming from. And then just look around, see if there's anywhere that anyone's got a garden there already, or what's growing in nature, and then mimic that a bit. That's really the best way to go when you're working with slightly more extreme conditions, is see what thrives already.
Yeah, and actually all of those on that gravel garden slide that I showed earlier, they are all in the most extreme sun, and it's really windy. There's absolutely no shelter for those plants at all. So, grass, it's like Stipa gigantea, Stipa tenuissima, that now has a new name that I can never remember, I think. Verbenas, what else? Eryngiums do really well in those conditions. And dianthus, actually. I've got loads of dianthus, and they are really happy around there. Should we try and do one more question? Okay, they're quite specific. Is there any brand of organic peat-free compost that you would recommend?
Yes, fertile fibres, they're great. And there's coir, which doesn't hold any nutrient, and you can, there are different, there's more sustainably sourced coir and there's less sustainably sourced coir, so it's worth looking at the sort of province of those when you're looking into that. But you can mix that in to anything, and I think fertile fibres does use coir as well in its mix, and that's great at retaining moisture in the same way that peat does, but it's not peat, it's a more sustainable version of moisture holding. And then if you need more nutrient for it, I use an organic seaweed mix on my seedlings within that, because the coir doesn't hold nutrient, whereas peat does. So that's the thing that you're missing. But you can supplement with all sorts of organic and sustainably sourced fertilizer.
I saw this amazing thing on Instagram yesterday about somebody that had planted, do you see this, Millie, that had planted seaweed into their beds? And
it's Beck's Botanical Tales. Is that right? Maybe not.
No, possibly, but I can't remember. I'm so bad at remembering everything. But all the plants were sort of 30%, 40% bigger. It was incredible.
Wow. I've heard people do that before. Actually, I've heard of someone in the Outer Hebrides do that before. I was there a few years ago, and I met an oyster oyster catcher and honey guy, and his garden, he said, was all built on seaweed, and it was extraordinary. So I think that is a proper thing.
Wow, it's amazing. Okay, yeah. I said that was the last question, but I've just seen a nice one, so I'm going to ask this. Which are the best herbs for bees and butterflies?
Oregano, thyme, herbs which have the flowers. My marjoram is wonderful because there's a point when it's like at peak flowering and it's just covered in butterflies. It's like it's this beautiful vibrating thing. So marjoram is a really lovely thing to have. It's just special watching like 40 or 50 butterflies on one plant alone. It's just a special thing to have. So that's a good one.
Amazing. That's a nice note to end on. We're actually at our time limit now. Millie, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks,
Claire. It's been so nice to talk to you, and I really hope, thanks to everybody for listening, and I really hope that we've answered some questions, even with my incompetence with the chat box, and that you've got some great info from Millie today.